Welcome back. JustProfessor here. Your memory of an experience doesn't match the actual experience. Your brain throws away most of what happened and only keeps two specific moments, the most intense part and the ending. Everything else basically disappears, and this is controlling way more of your life than you realize. Imagine you go on a vacation. 7 amazing days. But on the last day, your flight gets delayed for 6 hours and you're stuck in a terrible airport. When people ask you about the trip later, you'll probably say it was frustrating or disappointing, even though 6 out of 7 days were great. Or think about watching a movie, 2 hours of entertainment. But if the ending is terrible, you'll remember the whole movie as bad. Your brain doesn't average out experiences. It doesn't give equal weight to all the moments. It focuses on peaks and endings, and that's what you remember. This is the peak-end rule, and it's warping your memories of basically everything. The peak-end rule means your memory of an experience is determined almost entirely by two things: the most intense moment, whether good or bad, and how it ended. The duration doesn't matter much. The average quality doesn't matter much. Your brain takes the peak moment and the final moment, averages those two together, and that becomes your memory of the whole experience. This creates massive distortions in how you remember things. A short, intense experience can be remembered as better than a longer, pleasant experience just because the peak was higher. An experience that was mostly good can be remembered as bad just because it ended poorly. An experience that was mostly bad can be remembered as okay if it ended well. Your memories don't reflect reality. They reflect peaks and endings. The problem is you make decisions based on these distorted memories. You avoid things that you remember as bad even though they were mostly good. You repeat things you remember as good even though they were mostly mediocre. You judge people, places, and activities based on peak-end memories rather than the full reality of the experience. Let me show you where this affects your life. Relationships are huge for this. Think about a relationship that ended badly. When you look back on it, the bad ending colors your memory of the entire relationship. You might have had years of good times together, but because it ended in a painful breakup, your memory treats the whole relationship as bad. The peak-end rule makes you forget or minimize all the good moments because they were neat at the end. Or the opposite happens. A relationship that was mostly difficult but ended amicably might be remembered more fondly than it deserves. The good ending overwrites the struggles. This affects whether you'd get back together with someone, how you talk about past relationships, and what you think you learned from them. Medical procedures demonstrate this really clearly. Researchers did studies on colonoscopies, which are uncomfortable medical procedures. They found that patients who had longer procedures but with less discomfort at the end remembered the experience as less painful than patients who had shorter procedures that ended at peak discomfort. Total pain duration didn't matter as much as how it ended. This is wild. People preferred more total pain if it ended better. This has real implications for healthcare. If doctors understand the peak-end rule, they can structure procedures to end on less painful moments, even if that means slightly extending the procedure. Patients will remember it as better, even though objectively they experienced more discomfort. Customer service uses this whether they know it or not. A customer has a problem. The entire interaction is frustrating as they try to resolve it. But if the customer service rep is really helpful and friendly at the very end and solves the problem, the customer remembers the experience positively. The peak-end rule makes them forget the earlier frustration. The good ending dominates their memory. Smart businesses know this. They make sure the last interaction with the customer is positive. The checkout experience is smooth. The goodbye is warm. The final impression matters more than the average quality of service throughout. Vacations and trips are massively affected by peak end. You can have 6 amazing days and 1 terrible day. And if that terrible day is at the end, you'll remember the whole trip negatively. Or you can have a mediocre trip with 1 spectacular moment and a pleasant ending, and you'll remember it as a great trip. This is why endings matter so much for travel. The last day shapes your memory of the entire vacation. Events and parties follow this pattern. A party can be fun for hours, but if it ends awkwardly or disappointingly, that's what sticks in memory. Or a party can be boring for most of the time but have one great moment and end on a high note, and people will remember it as a good party. The peak-end rule is one of the most powerful memory biases you have. It makes you remember experiences based on their most intense moments and their endings rather than based on the average quality or total duration. This creates massive distortions between what actually happened and what you remember happening. A mostly good experience with a bad ending becomes a bad memory. A mostly bad experience with a good ending becomes an acceptable memory. A long, pleasant experience can be remembered as worse than a short, intense experience just because peaks matter more than duration. Your brain throws away most of your actual experience and keeps only the highlights and the finale. This affects everything. How you remember relationships, vacations, medical procedures, work projects, entertainment, learning experiences. Your decisions about what to repeat and what to avoid are based on these peak-end memories rather than on the full reality of what you experienced. Dining experiences demonstrate this. Restaurants understand the peak-end rule instinctively. The meal might be good but not spectacular. But if they bring you an amazing dessert at the end, or the service is exceptionally warm when you're leaving, you'll remember the restaurant positively. The ending moment weighs heavily in your overall impression. Work projects show this bias clearly. You can work on something for months with steady progress. But if it ends in a crisis or failure, you'll remember the whole project negatively. Or a project can be a struggle throughout but end successfully, and you'll look back on it fondly despite all the difficulties. School and learning experiences get filtered through peak end. A student might struggle in a class all semester but have a breakthrough moment and do well on the final. They'll remember the class more positively than a student who understood things easily all semester but bombed the final exam. The ending performance dominates the memory more than the average experience throughout. Entertainment follows this ruthlessly. Movies, TV shows, books, they all live or die on their endings. A show can be great for seasons but have a bad final season, and fans will remember it as disappointing. A book can be mediocre for most of its length but stick the landing, and readers will recommend it. So, how do you work with the peak-end rule instead of being controlled by it? First, recognize that your memories are not accurate recordings of experiences. When you remember something as good or bad, that's the peak-end memory talking, not an average of the whole experience. Before making decisions based on memories, try to recall the full experience, not just the memorable peaks and the ending. Second, engineer your endings when you can. If you're planning an event, a trip, a project, or any experience, pay special attention to how it ends. A strong ending will improve how people remember the whole thing, even if the middle was rough. This isn't manipulation. It's working with how memory actually functions. Third, be careful about judging experiences immediately after they end. Right at the ending is when peak-end bias is strongest. Give yourself time before deciding if something was good or bad. Let the immediate ending fade a bit before making judgments. Fourth, use the peak-end rule to your advantage in commitments. If you need to do something unpleasant, try to end it on a better note rather than stopping at the worst moment. You'll remember it as less bad, which makes you more likely to do it again when needed. Fifth, be aware of this in relationships. Don't let a bad breakup erase all the good times that actually happened. And don't let a friendly ending make you forget real problems that existed. Try to hold a more balanced view than peak-end memory naturally gives you. Sixth, recognize the duration neglect aspect. An experience that lasted longer but had a worse peak-end combination might have actually given you more positive moments total than a shorter experience with a better peak-end. Don't ignore duration completely just because your memory does. Understanding this doesn't give you perfect memory, but it does help you question your memories. When you remember something as terrible, Ask yourself if it was actually terrible throughout, or if you're just remembering a bad peak or ending. When you remember something as amazing, consider whether the whole experience matched that, or if you're inflating memory based on a great moment and conclusion. The peak-end rule also gives you power over how others remember experiences you create. If you're hosting, teaching, leading, or organizing anything, pay attention to peaks and endings. You can't control every moment, but you can shape the moments that will stick in memory. Your memories are not reality. They're simplified stories your brain tells based on shortcuts like the peak-end rule. Know the shortcut. Question the story. And when you can, engineer the peaks and endings to create memories that serve you rather than distort your experience. Subscribe to discover more ways your memory is rewriting your past without you knowing.